We're in Sefer Yehoshua and Parakeh Psukim Gimel to Dalid. Let's start it up, go through it, and be brief over here. Yasser Yehoshua Charvos Sudim Vayamal as Bnei Yisrael O give us our elos. Already started with this pasuk last time that Yehoshua made these Charvos Surim, which is a simple explanation. Iraq Unclus explains it as referring to a knife. We discussed the difference between a knife and a rock last time. Vayamal as Bnei Yisrael, and he circumcised all of the Jews. O give us a pisca by the valley of the foreskins. V'zeh Hashem al Yehoshua, and this is the matter that Yehoshua circumcised all of that he was involved with the circumcision. Kol ha'am hayotzim mitzrayim, the entire nation that came from Egypt, hazachorim, the males. Kol anshel milchama, all the people that go to war. Meisa b'midbar, they died in the war. Baderech b'tzeisim mitzrayim, they died in the war when they left. All the men of age to fight in war, Kol Anshei Milchama, Meisa b'midbar, they all died in the desert. Baderech b'tzeisim mitzrayim, on the way they were in when they were taken out of Egypt for during the duration of 40 years, they all died. It was decreed. Kimulam hayu kol ha'am hayotzim, because all the people who left Egypt were circumcised. V'kol ha'am hayu lodim b'midbar b'derech seis mitzrayim l'malu, and everyone that was born in the desert was uncircumcised, etc., etc. So comes along the Mitzudas David over here and explains Roitza Loimer. This is the reason, meaning to say, this is the reason why Yehoshua himself had to perform the Memilah, had to circumcise them, because he was the one who was circumcised. Zehadavar. Other people knew how to perform the circumcision. It wasn't because of that. It was because they were uncircumcised. And then the next Mesudus explains that the entire nation that came out from Egypt, they were all circumcised and fitting to perform the circumcision, but they all died, and therefore they couldn't perform the circumcision. So we see something very, very important from this Mitzudas David, that you have to be circumcised in order to perform circumcision on someone else. We'll come back to that point very soon. Mesilas HaNeviim over here on Pasuk Gimel says that this is a tremendous merit that was for the entire nation. They demonstrated a tremendous amount of self-sacrifice for this mitzvah of Milah, even though that they didn't come to rest yet, and they were surrounded from all sides from their enemies. 31 different kings and all the armies over there. And these are enemies, they could have utilized the weaknesses that the Jews had for performing the circumcision then and attacked them when they were in pain. They still believed in Hashem and they still went through with the circumcision, even with all of those potential issues looming. Similarly, the Be'er Moshe and Pasuk Ches says that the Pasuk over here is emphasizing the tremendous amount of Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, that the Jews used over here, that they demonstrated for the mitzvah of Milah, because they're surrounded from all their sides from all their enemies, and most people are in pain. Such a idea, and they were prone to lose, but no. And then you already know what happened with Shechem. That you could get weak after Parshas Vayishlach. Still, they fulfilled the mitzvah of Hashem. Mishra Zozov picks up on something very important over here. What's the Mitzudas that we just discussed? Yimul Yimul. Only someone who is circumcised is able to perform circumcision for someone else. That's what the pasuk teaches us over here, that Yehoshua himself needed to perform the circumcision, because they already died. However, the question is, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah and Chav Zayin Amud Aleph says the opposite, that an uncircumcised Jew is kosher. He's able to perform Milah. How do you reconcile that? So your answer is based on a Taz in your day in Hilchos Milah and Siman Reish Samach Daled Sivkot Aleph that says that if it's possible to perform the circumcision right now, so do it. What does this mean? Torah Shulchan Aruch explain it's a machlokas between an argument between Tosfos and the Rambam. Specifically, someone who is uncircumcised because his brother died from a circumcision being performed on him. So now he could perform circumcision on someone else, even if he's uncircumcised. It's a very rare case for a person to die from circumcision. But if someone had a brother who died, he doesn't need to perform the circumcision. And the logic is like this. He's considered onus. It's an extenuating circumstance or pressure. He can't perform the circumcision, so to say. It could be dangerous. Maybe for him. So there's a whole discussion in that case if it's considered that he's circumcised or not. Therefore, taking this idea and applying it. Immediately when they went into Israel and they were able to perform the circumcision on themselves, then they were unable to circumcise others because they had no excuse then for being uncircumcised. The only excuse is that we were on the go, fighting war, they could move any minute, it would be dangerous. Once they're in Israel, they had no excuse. So when they were on the go, even though they were uncircumcised, it was considered as if they were circumcised, according to some. However, once they're in Israel, they're just uncircumcised, and now they can't perform the circumcision for someone else. B'nochav Gimel. Shiles and Juvas Chsam Soifer in your day in Siman Shin. Right. Based on what the Ramban says in Parshas Lach Lecha, Avram performed circumcision. Excuse me. Avram first circumcised family members, people in his house, and then he circumcised himself. How is that so? So the Ramban explains if he would have circumcised himself first, he would have been sick or would have been dangerous because he was old. And therefore he wouldn't be able to lehishtadel b'milos and to strive and to circumcise them. The Chassam Sofer follows up on that Ramban and explains, since Avram accepted upon himself to perform the circumcision, and he said, I'm going to perform the circumcision, so therefore he's considered as if he's already circumcised. And he's able to circumcise others. The only reason he didn't was because of, for a technical halachic reason, so that he could fulfill the circumcision for other people. However, according to the Taz, it's a question. According to the Taz, when you're able to circumcise yourself, at the end of the day, if you're not circumcised, you can't circumcise others. So the Sefer Or Chaim V'Shalom answers, Minchas Elazar. The intention of the Chassam Sofer is that since you have over here, if you would have circumcised yourself, then if Avram would have circumcised himself, he would have been unable to circumcise others. Therefore, he's considered onus, extenuating circumstance, in which case, meaning he's considered in an extenuating circumstance to circumcise himself, and therefore he doesn't need to. However, if then and there you're able to perform the circumcision, then that would be an issue. But since he wasn't able to, so then it was fine. That answers the Ramban. That explains the Ramban as to why first he circumcised his family members and then him. However, the Panim Yafos explains that Levi, even though that they were in Egypt, they circumcised their children. However, in the desert, there was no Ruach Mizrachis, there was no eastern wind. So then also Levi, the tribe of Levi, they didn't circumcise their children, as it says in Sefer Yehoshua. No one had the circumcision. So therefore, they didn't nullify the circumcision in Egypt. The only reason why they didn't perform the circumcision in the desert is because it was dangerous. And therefore, it's not considered like they were uncircumcised because of the circumcision of their children. In other words, the only reason why they didn't perform the circumcision in the desert is because it's dangerous. They're not considered uncircumcised because the whole reason why they didn't perform the circumcision was because of a danger. The proof is from the fact that they performed the circumcision in Egypt. Anyone was able to. And he says that's what it says maybe in Psachim al Ches, Chasam Sofer, and his Chuvas and Siman Reish Ches, that Levi did perform the circumcision in the desert. That's because a miracle happened and the special northerly wind came into their rooms to heal. Anyways, back over here. So this is one approach over here. That was all footnote. How to reconcile the difference. Do you need to perform Mila first on yourself or not before you circumcise someone else? Do you need to circumcise yourself first? Or could an uncircumcised person perform circumcision for someone else, halachically, a Mila? The answer is it depends. You have an exception case. Usually you need to. However, if you have the brother that died, then you don't need to. That's the idea over here. And we went on a tangent as to how Avram was an exception to this, considered dangerous, like the Jews in the desert, and he was able to circumcise other people first, even though he didn't have the circumcision. Now, another way to explain the Mitzudas is based on what the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam say. If there's a Yisrael who's a Gadol, a great Jew, who knows how to perform the circumcision, he comes before everyone else. The Lavush explains, what does it mean, a Yisrael Gadol, a great Jew? It means that he's Mahul, that he had circumcision first. He comes before everyone else. In other words, someone who actually had the circumcision, physically. Not that it's considered as if he had the circumcision. But he didn't perform the circumcision because of halachic loopholes like we just discussed. He wanted to perform the Mila, but he had a danger. No, no, no. And he's considered an extenuating circumstance. No, no, no. We're not talking about that. Someone who actually had the physical Mila, the physical circumcision, he is able to perform, and he comes first, rather, to performing the circumcision before anyone else. That's why Yehoshua performed the circumcision. Because the Ramah writes, "Yeshal hadar lachzor achal mohel ba'al brisa yoser tov v'sadik." When you choose a mohel, someone who will circumcise your child, you should try to go after the best and someone who's very righteous, a tzaddik. That's why Yehoshua circumcised him. Yeshua himself, like we find by the circumcision in Egypt. Moshe, Aaron, Yeshua, they were involved with it. They were the ones who were fitting to do it. So this is the idea, a deeper idea why Yeshua specifically did it. The next session, we're going to discuss at length. Tremendous tangent from this. A very important tangent. What's the deeper idea behind someone who is circumcised is able to perform circumcision for someone else, whereas someone who is uncircumcised cannot perform the circumcision? What's the deeper idea and lesson that comes from this? We're going to be doing a deep dive on this next time.